What I'd like to do is to share with you just a few of the unforgettable stories, but contained within that, powerful leadership and team building lessons. I've sailed twice around the world. The first time on what was called the world's toughest yacht race, and the second time with my wife and my 3 young children. They were aged just 9, 7, and 2. The key lesson out of all of that was how did I build a team with my non-sailing wife and 3 young children? So what I want to do is just to share a handful of stories about how I went about building that team, and also some of the lessons that I learnt from business. One of the key elements of that was all around the power of values and training your team to focus on what's right rather than what's wrong. So one of the stories I'll share is how values, and what we did is we took corporate values and we adapted them to family values. One of the core things is that I have 8 steps that I leave people to take away from the end of the talks. What makes this stick is the stories that wrap around it. So I'm just going to take you through a few of those stories now. So where our idea started was in June 2009. This is my wife, Nicola. And we came up with this idea of saying, how do we want our life to be different? Now, when we had that idea, it was a pretty crazy idea because Nicola, my wife, she'd sailed twice at that point. We didn't have the money, and we didn't have a boat. The one thing we did have in our favor was that I'd sailed around the world before on what was called the world's toughest yacht race. So let's talk a little bit about money, because this is where one of the big lessons came from for me. And that's my business partner, Ed. You may be looking at that picture and wondering why Ed is wearing a pair of yellow headphones, Ed, my business partner. And the real reason is that it was to shut the noise out. But actually, it was more powerful as a metaphor, because he wasn't really listening to me, I wasn't really listening to him, and neither of us were really listening to the messages that our business was telling us. You know, that was where we were in 2009. And we gave ourselves 5 years to make our plan happen. We said in 2014, we're going to set off sailing around the world. And by 2011, nothing had fundamentally changed. It was Einstein who's often credited with the saying, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing but expecting a different result. That was us in our business. So towards the end of 2011, I immersed myself in learning. I was absorbing all these ideas. I was started to implement all sorts of different things. And I was just doing all these things, and it was just me driving it all. But at the end of the first quarter, at the end of March, my business partner, Ed, came to me and said, Caspar, you're driving us all crazy. If you carry on doing what you're doing, then everybody, including me, is going to leave the business. I went and took a coach to really break down my leadership style and say, how do we go and build things together? All about values, and how do you build up teamwork and really getting a team working together. And for me, values became the very essence of that. And we created this picture that sat in our office, which is the one on the screen here, which captured all of our values. We didn't just talk about them once. What we did is we turned it into a weekly conversation. Most people will tell you what's wrong with the situation. And I think the reverse is true in building a team. You've got to build on people's strengths and tell people what's right. Yeah, those values, because the values shape your behaviors shape your actions, and your actions shape your outs. So we started to do that. And over the next 3 to 12 months, smiles and energy started to resonate through our business. And over the next year, we grew faster than we'd ever grown before, and we made more profit than we made in the previous 6 years in total. So around the same time, I was now thinking, how would I prepare my wife and 3 small children to sail around the world? So what we did is we decided to apply everything that we learned in the business at home. So this is my wife, Nicola, my son, Columbus, creating our values picture at home. I came to realize that purpose and values and the vision and the direction of an organization are the key assets of any leader. 2014, only several months before we left, we finally bought our boat, and we were ready to go and start sailing down through the Atlantic Ocean. And there's a really key lesson here that when we left, not everything was perfect. There would have been more things that we could have done to get ready. But the key lesson I always encourage people is not to wait for perfect. The world that we operate in today, it's uncertain, it's changing at its fastest rate ever. And I think the key skill set, the most important skill set we all need in business is how to embrace uncertainty and make decisions and move forward. So very briefly, the first part of our route, sailing down the UK, down to the Canary Islands in the Atlantic Ocean, and then we're heading across our first big ocean, going across to the Caribbean. What I would do is try and get everybody involved in different areas of the boat. So my son, Callum, he became our navigator. He's here learning how to use a sextant, so the traditional ways of navigating. Bluebell, my daughter, she became our radio expert and would be involved in the radio calls. Willow, my 2-year-old daughter, she loved cleaning up downstairs. And what was fascinating is it was just finding those right roles for everybody and building on their strengths, because everybody has something to offer. So the question I always ask is, do you notice the strengths in your team? How can you encourage people to do more of the things that they absolutely love doing? So by the time we crossed the Atlantic, we finished in the top third of the fleet. And I think it was because we got everybody doing things that they loved. We're working together as a team. We're working together in a harmony. And it's that really fine-tuning your performance that I think is so important for businesses these days. And actually, by the way, I should just mention this as well. So this is us in Bora Bora in the middle of the Pacific, and we're celebrating there because I just actually sold my business for a 7-figure sum. The only reason that we were able to step out of the business is because we put in place that really clear purpose, the vision, and the values, and just built an incredible team of people who will be able to run the business in my absence. And I think that's the key role of a leader, is to make themselves redundant by building brilliant people all around them. However, you do know that when you're going to sail around the world for 2 years, that things are going to go wrong at some point in time or another. Here was one of our big ones. And where we were literally 500 miles from the nearest piece of land deep in the South Pacific. What happened to us is that we had power failure in the middle of the ocean. What does power failure mean? On a boat, it means that you've got no navigation systems to know where you are, no autopilot to steer the boat, you've got no lights, no cooker, nothing. And we were completely isolated and out there and on our own. Here's what we did. We lived our values because we talked about these every single day, and we celebrated the things that the kids did well and that we were doing well. Over the next 4 days, my wife and I, we hand steered the boat to get to the next island of Niue, and we just literally lived our values. There was laughter, there was compassion, there was understanding. I think if I'd been back in my corporate world, someone would have said, it's your fault. Why haven't we done this? But because we'd ingrained these values, we celebrated what was right. We actually thrived in that situation, and it became an incredibly powerful anchor for how do we work together as a team. There we go. We literally lived our values and worked together as a team. And a very important formula, which some of you may well be familiar with, which I've always taught my children, which is E plus R equals O, where E is the event, something happens to you. R is your reaction. What do you do as a result of that? And O is the outcome. It doesn't say the event equals the outcome. It's the event plus your reaction. How do you respond? That's what defines the outcome in whatever situation. So that's what I encourage people to do, to take charge of their emotional responses and how do they react in any particular situation. Our route continued on around the world, and we finally celebrated in Grenada, back in the Caribbean, crossing our outbound track. And we didn't just get to celebrate that end point because it just celebrated the big things, but all the while we were building people, building the team by celebrating those small victories along the way.